The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ohio Healthy Homes Network Fall Webinar Series. This morning's webinar is going to be on lead-safe rental housing certification programs. We know that the majority of lead poisoning occurs in the home. We all want to make sure that families who are seeking stable housing are able to find homes that are lead-safe. We know that municipalities across Ohio are looking at a variety of ways to make sure that housing can be certified as lead safe, and making sure that families know where to find these lead safe houses. And as Ohio works to transition to a strategy that's based on primary prevention, lead safe housing is going to be essential. So today we're going to hear from individuals in 3 different cities tackling lead housing certification, as well as the statewide lead safe rental registry. Next slide. For those of you who don't, go back one, sorry. For those of you who don't know, I am Tim Johnson. I work at the Ohio Poverty Law Center as a policy advocate. The Ohio Poverty Law Center advocates for policies to reduce poverty and increase access to opportunities and justice for all Ohioans. Myself, I focus on education, childcare, and human services issues. And before that, I worked in the state legislature as a staffer to several members of the state legislature. And I ultimately ended up working in the Senate Minority Caucus, where I was the senior policy advisor, where I worked on the health and human services initiatives for the caucus, as well as focusing on tax and insurance policy. And recently, I joined the Lead Free Kids Coalition as a member of the leadership team, helping to further the mission of ensuring that all Ohio children are safe from lead in their homes and in their communities. Next slide. So I just want to take a moment to thank and recognize all of our sponsors for making today's presentation and the fall webinar series as a whole possible. Just want to thank you so much for all the good work that you're doing across Ohio. But I also want to take the time to give a special shout out to Ohio, including Gina Wilt, Parker Dean, and Josh Johnson for helping with so many things, especially the behind the scenes technical duties. I am a sort of technologically inept person. So literally, I could not do this without the assistance of Ohio and all of their work behind the scenes. Next slide. So before we get started and before we meet our panelists, I just want to go through a few sort of housekeeping details. So everybody is going to be muted. You will only be able to hear myself as the moderator and then each of the individual panelists. But feel free to submit questions using the questions feature on the GoToWebinar control panel. Make sure that when you're asking questions that you address them to a specific presenter if possible. We are going to hold all the questions until all of the presenters have gone. That way, everybody sort of has equal time to give their presentation. But please feel free to send questions as you think of them. So you don't have to wait till the end to send your questions. You can send them as they come into your mind, but we will ask them and pose them to the presenters at the end once everyone is gone. Today's presentation will be recorded live, and we hope to have it posted to the OHHN website. The presentation is scheduled for an hour and a half, blocked off. It might end early depending on how many questions and how long the presentations go, but we do have this set from 10 to 11:30. If at any point you are having technical issues, please feel free to reach out to me, the moderator, Tim Johnson, using the chat box, and we will try to help you with any technical difficulties that you're having. Next slide. All right, and so if we have any registered sanitarians who are applying for CEs, make sure you enter your name and your RS number into the chat box at the beginning and again at the end of the webinar. So won't be able to give you any credit for this if you don't enter your name and your RS number into the chat box. So make sure you do that if you're looking for the credit. Also, just want to make sure you all know that there is going to be a survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. We want to encourage everybody to participate, give us some feedback, be as honest as you can. We really encourage you all to participate in the survey just so we know how the presentation went for everyone. All right, next slide. All right, so now we're going to get into the bios for everyone. Give me 1 second. All right, so first we have Councilwoman Carla Thompson. Carla Thompson is the 3rd Ward representative for the Lima City Council. She's taught in the Cleveland Municipal School District and Canton City Schools, which is where she met her husband, Jacob King. She has 2 sons, Furious and Atticus, because she and her husband believe in the power of naming things. Carla is a proud Cleveland State alumna with a bachelor's degree in English and a master's in education from Indiana State University. The issues she's currently championing are rental housing registry, which we'll hear about today, Black Lives Matters issues, and LGBTQ equity and fairness issues. Next slide. We have Stephanie Beebe, who is the Lead Safe Coordinator for the Toledo Department of Neighborhoods, which I understand is a brand new, recently created position. So congrats, Stephanie. She has a background in public safety with over a decade in experience in housing as a project manager and a paralegal. She coordinates the implementation of the new 2020 lead ordinance between multiple public and private agencies and community groups. In her private life, she's a volunteer with local animal rescue and heads her neighborhood block watch. She lives with her husband and 5 fur kids, and when she has spare time, she writes fiction. Next slide. We also have Dennis Kennedy, who is the Commissioner of the Division of Code Enforcement for the City of Toledo, a voting member of the American Association of Code Enforcement, member of the International Code Council family, who is actively pursuing his Certified Code Enforcement Administrator credential. He's also Certified Property Maintenance and Zoning Inspector, and is a current master's candidate in the field of public administration and has a bachelor's degree in communication and media from the University of Toledo. Welcome, Dennis. We also have Kellen Craig, who is Director of Multifamily Housing at the Ohio Finance Agency, worked on housing and community development programs at Ohio Development Services Agency, and he served as the Housing Preservation Coordinator at the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. He has a dual degree in political science and economics from Kent State University, has a master's degree from The Ohio State University in City and Regional Planning and in Public Policy and Management. He is the former president of Columbus Landmarks Foundation and is an appointee to the Franklin County Commissioners Tax Incentive Review Council. Next slide. And then finally, we have Ayanna Blue-Donald, who is the director of the City of Cleveland's Department of Building and Housing, currently serving on the steering committee for Cleveland Lead Safe Coalition, has a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering and a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of San Francisco School of Law. And in her spare time, she enjoys fishing, reading, traveling, and spending time with her children. So with all of that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and start. And the first presenter will be Carla. Carla, take it away whenever you are ready.
There we go. I just had to get myself unmuted. Thank you so much, Tim. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our proposed rental registry and licensing system, along with a snippet about our lead safe grant that we just received. So if we could go ahead and go to the next slide. So I thought that I should start off with really the kind of trauma that I went through when I first moved to Lima. My husband got a position at one of the colleges here, and so we moved from Cleveland to Lima back in 2013. That is a 3-hour trek across the state. And so we spent several days going back and forth, scheduling visits to rental properties, trying to get into a home quickly before the fall semester started. And as I was calling and scheduling, I would say things like, my husband just got a job there, we are looking to relocate to Lima, and because I'm so far away, I need to schedule an appointment to look at a home. And what I got more than 3 times, I was told, I can tell by the sound of your voice, you wouldn't want to rent my property. And that had me perplexed. I really couldn't understand. I didn't know what I sounded like that they thought I would not want to rent. And I was worried, was I, did I not sound like I had money? Did I sound too Black? I didn't know. And finally, my husband got on the line with the 4th one and said, look, we don't understand. We're coming to see this house, schedule the appointment. And when we got to Lima, after looking at a few different rental properties, what we realized was that rental prices were kind of low at the time. And one of the main reasons was because so many of the properties were in deteriorated, dilapidated conditions. So I showed up to various appointments and could not believe the condition of what I was looking at. And more than once, our days ended in tears because we had no way of finding a decent rental property. And the reason why they would say that, I can tell by the sound of your voice, in other words, we sounded educated. We sounded like we would want a decent home to move into, and the property owners knew that what they were renting out were slum properties. And there are decent rentals in Lima, but they are very difficult. Right now, there is no way to figure out the good from the bad, the decent from the dangerous. So next slide, please. We did move. It was quite a bit of stalking of various landlords and finding a property that was good enough. Wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. And after being here for about 3.5 years, I decided to go ahead and run for city council. And I did win by a slim margin. I don't feel bad about winning by 22 votes because the person that I beat had only won his position by 5 votes. So, hey, I quadrupled it. I'm good. But one of my main 3 campaign issues, the big one was that we needed a rental registry, some way of holding landlords accountable, some way of finding what properties were viable, some way of promoting our rental market. So I had several people tell me when I was out knocking on doors that it wasn't just my issue, it was an issue for homeowners who were tired of living beside dilapidated properties, and it was an issue for tenants who were tired of fighting with landlords for repairs. We can go ahead to the next slide. So once we got on a council. I've actually been working towards developing our rental registry. Large cities in Ohio are mandated to have them. I believe it's over 250,000 if their population is there. They have to have those. The smaller cities, it's individual cities choosing whether or not they're going to do something like this. But back in 2019, the city of Lima contracted with Harnessy and Associates to provide a housing assessment for the city. So they were looking at everything, not just the rental market. The assessment was to detail the positives the city's homes and neighborhoods had, and also discuss in depth the problems with our housing stock, along with providing some possible solutions and action items. And the report was well over 60 pages and had some good positives, but we also had a lot to work on. If we could go to the next slide. So what the assessment found were some of the things that I already knew, but now I had numbers and statistics to go behind what I saw in my own neighborhood. So the first problem that they listed, the first area that needed addressed, was the need for a revitalization of the city's housing stock. And they said that that need was demonstrated by the number of vacant properties, that it was high and increasing. That is still the case at the moment. Our houses are old, with 34.7% of the existing homes in the city having been built prior to 1940. And that was true of both my rental and 2 years ago, I moved into, we are now homeowners. But my entire neighborhood was built before 1940. And you see that only 12% of the housing has been built in the last 4 decades, so after 1980. So we're not increasing in new development at the moment. And there was also a high number of houses that lacked, and this was what got me, that lacked a complete kitchen or plumbing facilities. And then, and I'm not sure how people are expected to live in properties where there isn't plumbing or kitchen facilities, but that's what we had, well over 3,000 homes missing those vital items. Medium home values were low and decreasing. The average home value in the city right now is $66,000 compared with $111,000 basically for the rest of Allen County. And we are the county seat here in Allen County. So our home values were well below average, and a majority of our houses are rented rather than owned. So we are close to the 60% mark as far as how many rentals there are versus owned homes. And the rental properties often tend to be less well maintained than owner properties. And that came directly from the housing assessment, along with several other issues. If we could go to the next slide. So that was the problem according to Harnessy. And according to me, what I saw was that Lima was a cheap and easy place to do the rental business. People, often had conversations about how they moved to Lima just to flip houses. And what we often had was that people would go to sheriff sales, you know, after 2008, when things kind of bottomed out. We had so many homes that were foreclosed on or were just vacant. And so people would buy homes at sheriff sales and then not actually do any work to them. There were no inspections, there was no work done. They would buy these properties as is, and as soon as they had cleaned out enough of the garbage, they would just rent them with no work done. And we had in the city no mechanism in place to hold these owner investors accountable for property maintenance, particularly on the inside of homes. Right now, the way our ordinances are, code enforcement can only go through and cite for what they see from the right of way. And then even after those citations are issued, so primarily we cite for grass and weeds. which is great on cutting down on, lawn issues, but it doesn't do much for home values. And there's no way, unless the tenant or the owner asks us to come in, that they can get inside of these homes for an internal inspection. So for instance, the home that I was renting, when I lived there for 4 years, the furnace was definitely on its way out. I'm sorry, the hot water heater was on its way out. And I spoke with the woman who rented it directly after me. And the gas company refused to light it when she started her service because the furnace was in such disrepair. They wanted the furnace replaced before they were willing to turn on, the water heater replaced before they were willing to turn it on. What my previous landlord did was just had her handyman come over and turn it on anyway. And that's the kind of things that we were running into quite often, along with missing plumbing, non-working toilets, bathtubs falling through floors, things of that nature. We can go on to the next slide. So the housing assessment offered some solutions to that particular problem. They said, let's go ahead and develop and implement an overarching neighborhood revitalization plan with strategies specific for each neighborhood. Remove blight, so demolition, rehabbing. And what stood out for me, because it just reinforced what I had been begging for, improve existing rental properties. If these are the majority of our properties, then that just seemed to me the place to start. Provide incentives to owners to keep up their properties, and strategies include continuation of code enforcement efforts, initiation of a landlord registration, and funding of rental rehabilitation. So you'll see that it's not just holding them accountable, but also providing some mechanisms to help them also improve their properties. So let's have some assistance for them, an incentive system, and also actually try to hold them systematically accountable for the condition of the properties. Address neighborhood safety and crime. And what you'll often find with rental registries is that they have a safe renting component where education is provided to owner investors, letting them know how to better choose tenants so that they are less likely to rent to criminals, to people who will bring down the neighborhood. And then set housing goals and develop implementation strategies for both subsidized housing and private investment. So often what we see with funding is that it's just for homeowners, at least city provided funding. And what our strategy has to be moving forward is how to also support private investment and investment owners. Forgive me, I know I'm talking a little fast. So if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So why have I been pushing so hard for a registry and licensing system? I know that it's just a small piece of turning around the housing stock in our city. But right now, the biggest complaint that I have against it is that people don't want things to be overregulated. However, we have had no regulation all this time, and we are kind of in a housing crisis here in the city of Lima, as demonstrated by the earlier statistics. So what would a registry licensing system do for us? It could provide a database of properties and contact information for landowners and property managers or representatives that safety services could access. The fire department and the police department were the first to reach out to me saying that we needed this. Right now, because of the convoluted method, well, there is no method. So what people have to do is look at the auditor site, try to find a name for an owner, investor, Often those are LLCs, and then it turns into investigatory work, like going to the state Secretary of State site, figuring out who's the agent for the LLC, saying, and sometimes we can figure out who to contact and sometimes we can't. So the fire department has had instances such as where they've had to turn off the electricity for a house that's had a fire, and they need to work with the owner before they can get services restored. And nobody has a way of getting hold of the owner, including the tenant. So that getting that database of properties and actual contact information is vital. Particularly the licensing system would provide a mechanism for internal inspections that takes the onus off of potentially vulnerable residents to report issues. One of the other things that we found in the housing assessment is that we are particularly high in our rental market on disabled, developmentally disabled, seniors, and single parent homes. So these are people who are very vulnerable, particularly financially. And what happens is when they do complain to the landlord or they do call code enforcement saying this is what's going on, they get evicted. And there's no real protection for them against that. Even if they report to code enforcement, the landlords would make the repairs, but then still evict the tenant. And sometimes it doesn't even look like an eviction because many of our slumlords in the city have gone to month-to-month. So month-to-month leases. So they don't even need to provide a reason. They just send a letter saying, we want the property back. And so you're being asked to move out next month since they've got the month-to-month lease going. And if we can inspect these properties on the inside before tenants get in, then they don't have to be the one saying, look, my bathtub is about to fall through the ceiling. Or every time I turn on the stove, there are sparks. If we can get in there and actually do those inspections beforehand. And then the licensing system would make it illegal to do the rental business in Lima without a license. And it makes it easier to pursue court action against those people that do. So right now, in order to find somebody for even things that we could see from like a neighbor's house, say there's like piles of trash in the backyard or the gutter is falling off or something like that, but it can't be seen from the right of way, but it can be seen from the neighbor's house. That neighbor has to be willing to let us onto their property to view the violation. They have to be willing to sign an affidavit that they have witnessed the violation. And then we have to have them actually be willing to come to court should it go that far. And a lot of people do not want to do that in their own neighborhoods. They're not interested in pursuing legal action and upsetting their neighbors or the owners next to them because they have to live there. So this licensing system says, look, this is a business, not your private property. And in order to do this business, this is the inspection that has to take place. So that's why the licensing component has to be there. We've had some registries across the state that have been found illegal in court. And primarily it's because of that, because they're doing these internal inspections, or they're calling for those internal inspections with just a registry system as opposed to licensing. The system would also allow for an incentive program to help landlords better conduct business and maintain properties. All the research about registry and licensing systems says that that is what positive licensing systems actually do, is they have the incentive piece so that we are helping and encouraging owner investors to maintain their properties and just do a better job of renting. And then we can go to the next slide. So with the system, we just had a meeting last night, a committee meeting where they're going to take back to council. Finally, this is, like I said, I've been a 4-year fight. But next week, council will vote on yay or nay to the actual registry. So wish me luck on that. The possibilities that I see and that the assessment saw was the improvement of the housing stock. Therefore, the current property values of homes in Lima would also improve. Create safer neighborhoods by including that crime safe rentals program I talked about. Create safer homes for low to moderate income residents. We have people here that, for whatever reason, don't necessarily qualify for Met housing, or they did, but they don't anymore because of different violations that they did. And so they're the ones who gravitate towards these low income properties. But we need a mechanism that outside of Met says that these properties have been inspected and are safe. It would provide for the easier contact between property owners and the safety services during emergencies and after emergencies. And incentive programs for property owners that include reduced costs for tenant background checks, so those can be negotiated. Evidence of property conditions in case of evictions occur. So it's not just to keep tenants safe. This would also help landlords when going to court, because they would have documentation from the city that says, look, I turned over the property in this kind of working condition, and this is what I got back. And then possible access to grant and city funds for lead abatement and property improvements. So let's go ahead to the next one.
And Carla, I'm just going to ask you to speed it up just a little bit.
You got it. I believe this is my last one. So there we go. So recently, the City of Lima, through the Department of Community Development, got the Lead Safe Lima Lead Abatement Grant. And it is for homeowners, but Ms. Crotty, our head of the Department of Community Development, also wrote the grant in such a way that funds could be available to investor owners, as long as they meet those following guidelines: have low to very low income tenants. The qualifying unit has to be occupied by a child under the age of 6. We were just to make the best use of funds. I'm sure the rest of the panel is aware that it costs a lot to do lead abatement. So to make the best use of the funds, we're targeting homes with young children. They have to own between 1 and 4 units, provide proof of ownership, all the little necessities there. But this is something that would be included for owner investors. Once they are registered, they would have access to applying for funds from the Lead Safe Lima grant. And that would also open them up to be available for other various home improvement programs that we have. If they could do the lead abatement, then they would qualify for other programs where we could assist them with future and further home improvements. So, and just to highlight, we're looking to do 87 low to very low income households. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a start, and it would definitely improve the quality of life of some of our children here in Lima. So that's all I believe I have.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Councilwoman. We appreciate all the work that you're doing in your community. It's fantastic to see someone see a problem in their community and then go out of their way to work to try to address it. And best of luck on the vote next week. I'll be keeping my fingers crossed. All right.
Please
I believe
do.
absolutely. And I believe, Stephanie, you are up next.
Hi, good morning. How are you? I hope everybody can hear me okay. So I do want to do a couple housekeeping measures. First, I am working from home, as you can see, and I do have fur babies. So if you hear a dog bark or a cat gets in the background, that's just the cost of doing business. Also, myself and Dennis Kennedy are here to answer questions. I'm going to be doing the presentation, but Dennis is our main code enforcement guy. So he is here to answer any questions about the back end enforcement. All right, next slide. So a little bit of background about Toledo and what our goals are here. We are working right now to amend and replace an old lead ordinance that we started in 2016 with its passage. The new ordinance that's actually being voted on today, we believe, by City Council, so this presentation is quite timely. And the point of this new ordinance is really the focus of this presentation. The goals that we have for it, are listed here. We want to increase the lead safe housing throughout the whole of the city. And this is just one of our sort of phases to start bringing this policy to life. So next slide. One of the in the previous ordinance, one of the issues was that there wasn't a whole lot of wraparound services or comprehensive plannings to sort of go with that ordinance. So the new ordinance really takes into effect all of the other implementation services that we're going to be providing to both landlords and tenants. We feel that it's really important to the success of this that we try to get the entire community on board. And providing sort of education to tenants on, things that they can do in the house or options that they have to report, a landlord who's maybe not being compliant or not responding, and also to help landlords with providing grants similar to what Lima is doing, as well as some other opportunities that we have coming down the pipeline. So we're trying to work with everybody to the best of our ability. One of our major partners is a local advocacy group, the Toledo Lead Poisoning Prevention Coalition, and they have been working on this for about a decade. So this will be all being brought to fruition, hopefully very soon here for them. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit about our lead ordinance history because it's kind of complicated. In 2016, the initial lead ordinance was passed. It focused on rental properties 1 to 4 units only and family child care homes. A local rental owner investor network sued over that ordinance. That ended up going all the way, went through appellate court. Appellate court did rule in our favor, and then the Ohio Supreme Court basically declined to hear it in agreement with the appellate court. So, and during this lawsuit and appeals process in 2019, our local council decided to pass a brand new lead ordinance to sort of preemptively deal with this issue. So there's a lot of confusion in our history about what the lead ordinance is and what it does because we've got multiple ones. So today, we came back to the table starting in 2020 because the Supreme Court gave us the go basically at the end of last year. So we all came back to the table here in 2020 to sort of revise and re-implement what we believe is the best ordinance to date and our best effort. So next slide. So the new 2020 lead ordinance is called the Residential Rental Properties and Lead Safety Compliance, which is a mouthful, but the ordinance itself is much more simple than the prior versions. Next slide. So this goes back to the language of the 2016 ordinance, which was upheld in court as being viable. One of the reasons that the lawsuit took place was they felt that small landlords were being discriminated against unfairly because we were targeting 1 to 4 units. However, the science and the data shows that the 1 to 4 units are literally our highest risk of lead poisoning within the city. And there's a Kirwan Institute study that showed this and showed also a disproportionate effect on low-income families and families of color. Go ahead. So there are some exceptions under the new ordinance. We eliminated a couple different things. We had like a hardship and a deferral and all kinds of things. And we wanted to sort of simplify that as much as possible, particularly because the original ordinance in 2016 should have already come to pass and was basically put on hold for the last 4 years. So technically everybody already got a deferral under the old ordinance. So we limited the exceptions down to just public-owned properties. So if it is a governmental entity that has taken a property through foreclosure, those properties are generally scheduled for demolition or immediate rehab and are vacant anyways. That would be like our local land banks and things like that. Or if the property is part of public housing and owned by LMHA, is our Lucas Metropolitan Housing Association. That entity already is subject to clearance testing and lead abatement exams through HUD. And they are working with us to basically, we're gonna also audit them every year just to make sure that, you know, they're getting their clearance reports, and they've been pretty forthcoming with that. So however, everybody else has to go through the lead safe certification process. If owners were previously certified under the old ordinance in good faith, we are going to go ahead and grandfather those folks in, because some people already did the inspection, already paid that money, that sort of thing. And we're just going to go forward with them rather than sort of punish them for being early to the game. Next slide, please. All right. So under this ordinance, this is what's going to be required. Already in the state of Ohio, under Ohio Revised Code, you are supposed to register your rental property with your local county auditor. This already exists, but like Carla mentioned in her presentation, a lot of the times when this registry occurs, they use an LLC, or they're out of state, or they're out of country even. We have a lot of Australian investors, strangely enough, that purchase housing. Yeah, I don't know why, but they purchase housing and then they sort of go away. And it's very hard to hold these folks accountable locally for what they're doing. So part of this registration also included us working with the auditor under that Ohio Revised Code to make sure that a local agent is designated and that is going to be updated. So Dennis in enforcement is going to make sure that once that deadline comes to pass, we at the city are going to actually help enforce this after the deadline that we've set of June 30th, 2021, to sort of get people to do what they're already supposed to do. Because in the past, there just really hasn't been much enforcement on this law that's been on the books. All right, once they are registered though, the next thing they have to do is they have to get a lead safe certification. This is done through our health department. They have to, the landlord hires a private inspector of their own accord, and they do a visual and dust wipe inspection under Ohio Department of Health and EPA standards. And then once that inspection is done, they can file an application with the health department. We went for the smallest fee possible with that of $25. There was a lot of discussion around what the application fee was going to be, but we wanted to try to make this as palatable as possible to landlords, because they are already going to be paying for the local lead inspection, and you know that's not cheap either, and we want to try to get as much compliance as possible. So they have their successful inspection, they take their application with the health department, they give it all to them, and then they get 5-year certificates for passing that local inspection, or if they have done a full abatement, and they can show that, or if they can show too that they've had the, there's actually no lead paint in this property, if they've had that test done as well, they can show that and they can get a 20-year certificate. There was some questions about why a 20-year certificate, like if you don't have, if you fully abated a property and you don't have any more lead, why do you need 20 years? Why isn't it forever? And that's because most abatement is actually done via encapsulation products. So they take an encapsulating paint and basically scrape the old lead paint off and then paint over it to encapsulate it. And the manufacturer's warranties on those products are only 20 years. So unless you're taking out walls and doing a full removal, it becomes very hard to try to really actually certify somebody as lead safe after that 20-year manufacturing warranty has expired. So, and we just, like I said, we try to keep it simple as possible and not recreate the wheel here. So 5 years or 20 years. Next slide, please. So a local lead inspection can be done by a risk assessor, a lead inspection worker, or a clearance technician under Ohio Revised Code. There's actually, I'm sorry, the Ohio Department of Health. There's like rungs of them basically, and different training methods for them. We allow what is the lowest level under Ohio Department of Health, the clearance technician, to be able to do this work. And then we followed exactly what guidelines the Ohio Department of Health uses for their inspections. So it's a full visual. They're going to look for any deteriorated paint and bare soil conditions within the drip line. Drip line is 3 feet extending around the perimeter of your house. That's important because that's where the majority of flaking or chipping paint from like opening windows, opening and closing doors, that's where it's going to settle. And it's also where children tend to play when they go outside and hang out. They're hanging out close to the house. So that's why things like a landscaping or a hedging or things like that become really important. The inspection is also going to look for lead dust samples on the windowsill, trough, and floor. There's a minimum of 12 wipes, and we set the threshold just whatever the current EPA standards are. The EPA is actually working on lowering those standards, and we expect as time passes, we don't want to have to go back and keep amending this ordinance. We expect this to continue to lower this threshold. I think the EPA just released a new levels in July of this year that are open for commentary, and then those are going to, I believe, pass pretty soon. And then, so we want to be able to keep up with the times without having to go back and amend this ordinance over and over. Next slide, please. All right, there was a lot of pushback from rental owners on dust wipes. And why are we doing dust wipes? Why not just do a visual inspection? All those kinds of things. And here's what the science shows us, that there's no safe amount of lead in the bloodstream at all. Right now, they only really monitor and test for children that are 5, and that's deciliter, or that's 5 micrograms per deciliter, I believe. Anybody who's 5 to 9 gets monitored. Anybody who's 10 plus gets active abatement orders, and they have to go through a full investigation under the health department. And those are current Ohio guidelines based upon high-risk census tracts. Every census tract in the city of Toledo is high risk. I'm sorry, zip code. It's every zip code. Because of our housing stock being so old, we're basically inundated with lead paint here. So what they're finding is that to get that blood lead level of 36, which if reminder, 5 to 9 is a monitoring, 10 plus is a full investigation and abatement orders under the health, 36 is incredibly terrible and devastating to the child. And that's basically, you just have to consume lead dust of 1 granule of sugar a day. So if you live in a house with lead dust, it's not hard for a child to be intaking that. And the data shows us that children are not eating paint chips. They're not out doing these kinds of things, you know, that I think a lot of people say, you know, if the kid's not out eating the paint chips, he'll be okay. And that's not true. Most of the damage is done by the consumption of lead dust, and lead dust floats in the air. And the only way to tell if there's lead dust out there is with a dust wipe sample. We don't have any other scientific way to sort of do that analysis right now. I wish we did. I wish we had some more magical and determining way, but the lead dust wipe analysis is recognized by our local health department, Ohio Health Department, the EPA. It's the only thing that talks about lead dust levels, and there's standard practice across the country for other lead laws, for measurement and enforcement. So it's our best tool in our toolbox, and we're requiring it because it's being shown that a visual assessment alone is not enough, and you have to have some kind of analytical tool to be able to capture how much lead dust is out there. So next slide, please. However, we're not going to put owners all on their own to do this work. We are going to help them. You know, we estimate the average rental in Toledo, which is about 1,000 square foot unit, it rents for about $700 a month, which is pretty affordable for most folks, given across the country standards. We anticipate that the cost to most rental owners under this new ordinance is going to be $600 for a 5-year certificate. So less than 1 month's rent is what it's going to cost you to sort of get compliant with this. And that's all in. That includes your lead inspection. That includes paying somebody to come in and like clean your windows and your wells before the inspection. Maybe do a quick scrape and paint of anything that might be peeling on your windows and things like that. So it's pretty affordable. Now, if you have to do a full exterior or interior scrape and paint, you're looking at about $2,200 each. So that would be $4,400 if you have to do both, if you have to repaint this whole house. And so that's a cost too, but keep in mind that if you needed a full exterior scrape and paint before this ordinance, you still needed that. Like this ordinance did not create that need. That existed before this ordinance. So we're just trying to make sure that you do what you're supposed to be doing in the first place. One of the things that we are providing, though, is we have we've set aside some CDBG funds to do a 50-50 matching grant. That's $5,000, up to $5,000 a unit for lead remediation and maintenance work. So if you do have to do that full scrape and paint, we'll help you pay for it. We've set $1 million of it throughout the city, and then we've set aside $200,000 in low to moderate income target neighborhood buckets. These 3 neighborhoods in our city are the 3 of the most high risk for lead poisoning, and they're 3 of our action plan target areas for the entire city that we're really trying to assist. But we do recognize, we have to partner with owners and childcare home operators. One of my jobs as the coordinator is really doing these kind of outreach efforts and continuing to develop these tools to get financial assistance and lending products. We're actually hoping to roll out a new lending product with a local bank here very soon that will also help owners get a low interest loan to be able to do this kind of work on their own, even if they don't meet the grant guidelines. So next slide. All right, so once you get your property all ready to go, it's cleaned up, you need to hire a local lead inspector. You can use a risk assessor, a lead inspector, or a clearance technician, so long as they're registered with the health department. It's got to be compliant with all of the other standards out there. And our local health department is going to be working to train and certify these local folks to be able to do this work. So we have a 2 years until our first lead safe compliant date hits, which is June 30th, 2022. That's when Dennis over in code enforcement is going to kick in and really start hitting the ground on enforcement. But until that time, one of our major jobs here is to develop capacity to get this work done. We estimate we need approximately 100 additional inspectors to do this work. So ideally, this will create jobs. It will create good jobs with good training and people with the ability to sort of run their own businesses and things like that. So right now we're developing this workforce capacity so that folks can get the job done. Next slide, please. What are we going to do to try to make this capacity happen? Like I said, our local health department is going to start doing training classes. They're going to begin in January 2021. They're going to keep running them until they basically run out of interest. So it's pretty exciting. You can start the class as a clearance technician if you want, and then you can sort of work up the rungs to the higher levels if you find that this is for you. And there is a significant need, not just in Toledo, but throughout the state of Ohio, where there are not enough, particularly lead abatement contractors. There are not enough out there to sort of get this work done. So there's a sincere need to develop this capacity. One of the big things that I'm doing with my position within the Department of Neighborhoods is working with our local lead coalition, our advocacy group, to push interest in these classes, to put butts in seats, as it were. And also we're developing ads. We have a marketing strategy and a whole marketing campaign around not only the lead inspector development, but also education for tenants and assistance for landlords. So it's a lot of work. Next slide.
Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to speed it up just a little bit as well.
No problem. All right, so the implementation and the monitoring, that's all done through the Department of Neighborhoods, really part of my job there. And there's my contact information if you have additional questions after this and you want to reach out. But we will continue to work with public-private partnerships because developing those are going to be essential to the success of this ordinance. Next slide. This is a map of when our compliance dates are required. So you'll see the targets in red. Those are our most at-risk census tracts, and they are located really around our core central city neighborhoods. This is the neighborhoods you're going to find the highest amounts of poverty, the highest amounts of minority housing, and the highest amounts of lead poisoning in the city. And this data was sort of all compiled together, and we tried to target the highest risks first. Next slide, please. So enforcement is going to be run through code enforcement. The health department is going to certify the properties as lead safe and issue those actual certificates. But anybody who doesn't comply, they're going to be subject to Denison code enforcement. They have to. We're going to do it under current housing code. We didn't invent new enforcement tools. You know, we really wanted, again, to try to keep this as simple as possible and to fit within our current wheelhouse as much as we could. So this is our current housing code. We did put a cap of 10,000 per year per dwelling unit because those offenses can rack up daily. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't get out of hand. But at the same time, we will also want to make sure that if we're providing these carrots of grants and funding and assistance to homeowners, we also have a stick involved to be able to really make those who don't want to comply do what they're supposed to do. Next slide, please. This is a big thing. So the protection of tenants is very difficult under this ordinance. And we did bake in that owners, they can't, you know, rent until a certificate is obtained. They're not supposed to evict, increase rent, or retaliate against a tenant. All of this is in the law, all right? The enforcement of this, though, is where things get challenging for people in our positions. We have to build out partnerships with other public-private agencies so that tenants have tools, because under Ohio revised or under Ohio code, we at the city cannot create a private right of action for tenants, and one does not exist in Ohio state law. That is the main enforcement tool that when landlords do not comply, tenants can basically file suit against those landlords for, you know, failure to provide safe and adequate housing. Well, anybody who's worked in this field for any amount of time knows that putting the onus on tenants is not helpful. You know, either they don't have the finances, or they don't have the ability to sort of do these things, or they just don't want to because they're afraid. And these are, you know, realistic concerns that we have to address as, you know, policymakers and people implementing these programs. So one of the things that I'm going to be working heavily doing is with folks at the Fair Housing Center, folks at ABLE, to try to develop these tools for tenants to be able to go out and sort of, you know, enforce this on their own as well. And hopefully we can have some success there. But this is one of our most challenging aspects going forward, is we want to protect tenants, and we're trying to figure out how the best way to do that. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a list of things that we already have in place. It includes all of our lead-based grant awards today, as well as funding that we have for a very large marketing and communication campaign that we're running. So you can see what we're already doing. Next slide, please. This is what we plan to do. We're going to launch a website. It's going to be our resource portal. We're also going to develop one in person once ideally COVID goes away someday. We'll have an in-person ability for people to come into the office. We're going to create additional work groups within our advocacy group, and we're going to keep trying to raise money to do this work because it's huge, and we cannot put all of this on landlords to do it. We have to be out there trying to get this funding for them as well. Next slide, please. All right, this is there are some things that Ohio State could help, and I know that we're here for the Ohio Healthy Homes Network, and I know that a lot of you out there are hopefully, you know, involved in this in some way and can go out and be advocates for folks doing this, you know, in your local communities as well. But there's some things that municipalities just cannot do that would be really helpful if states would also consider. So there's legislation. It's the RRP rule. It's done, I believe, by the EPA, and basically talks about, exactly what you need to do if you're going to be working in this industry to have best practices. We also believe strongly is that clearance testing should involve dust wipes. If you're going to have a lead legislation law, then it cannot be visual assessment only. It must include the dust wipe measures. We believe that there needs to be improved training requirements and a system for filing complaints so that tenants or neighbors or people just in general can go in and, make these kinds of complaints against property owners. We also think that lead safe demolition practices are going to be necessary. I know that there are some lead safety measures currently in place, such as keeping a house wet when you're tearing it down. But for the most part, that lead just sort of ends up in the air. And I know it's an additional burden on local bureaucracies to be able to comply with lead safe demolition practices, but it's also a necessity. We also think that there should be some accountability. Again, that private right of action for tenants is huge, and that's something that only the state of Ohio can do. We also think that the lead paint manufacturers are the ones that are originally responsible for this problem, not the current rental owners, and certainly not the current tenants or anything like that. They did not do this. They probably weren't even alive when the lead paint was going on. So this is really their problem that they created, and we would like to see them held accountable. And of course, we would like to see some additional local funding for lead remediation and education efforts. It's always about the money and trying to get that into your community and trying to get this work done. So those are my asks, and I think that's it.
Very good. Thank you so much, Stephanie. We appreciate it. And it looks like there's a lot of, upcoming votes on ordinances and registries and all those good things. So I'll keep my fingers crossed for you as well. Sorry. Kellen, it looks like you are up next. So feel free to go whenever you are ready.
All right. Good morning. Like Stephanie, I have a cat as well. He usually doesn't bother me until 3 or 4 in the afternoon when it gets closer to dinner time. So he'll hopefully not join us for the conversation. And apologies if there's any road noise. I'm also working from home and live on a very busy street. So, but glad to be here on behalf of the Ohio Housing Finance Agency and some of the folks at the Ohio Department of Health and Ohio Department of Medicaid who have been involved in developing this statewide Ohio Lead Safe Housing Registry. So let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. So this registry was created to increase the awareness and access to lead safe housing. This was created and authorized through House Bill 49, which was the state budget bill for the 17-18 biennium budget. And of course, this is intended to create a registry of residential rental units for the state of Ohio. Certification is in accordance with the Ohio Administrative Code, which is 3701-81. So if you're having some issues sleeping, by all means, pull up the Ohio Revised Code and take a look. The Ohio Healthy Homes Network, of course, was instrumental in its creation and development, and of course, passage of that legislation with language in it. So kudos to them for that work. And of course, as I mentioned, the Ohio Department of Health, Ohio Department of Medicaid, and OHHA have all been involved in helping put this together. Next slide, please. A little history. I want to make clear that the Ohio Lead Safe Housing Rental Registry is kind of housed within what's called the Ohio Housing Locator. So about a decade ago, the Ohio Department of Aging and a number of state agencies and external stakeholders helped develop the first Ohio Housing Locator, which was really intended to help individuals find safe, decent, and accessible, affordable housing throughout the state. And over time, as you know, most software systems and databases do, they get a little aged. They are out of date and aren't maintained as well as they should be. And so over the years, it kind of became something akin to a glorified property listing. So they weren't necessarily real-time listings of available units. And so there's been some work recently to improve that locator. But the OHHA and the Ohio Department of Health entered into an MOU in August of 2017 to incorporate the Ohio Lead Safe housing registry into the existing locator. So that initial lead safe registry went live back on April 1st, 2019, in what was the previous Ohio housing locator. And then in collaboration with the Department of Medicaid and the Department of Health, we embarked right away really on trying to improve that service with a new housing locator. So next slide, please. And I should note, even though a lot of the units that are listed on the Ohio Housing Locator and on the Ohio Lead Safe Registry happen to be affordable or have some sort of federal or state assistance associated with them, it's not exclusively for that purpose. So any market rate, property owner or landlord has the ability to list their properties on either. So just a little bit of history of kind of where we're at. So back in May, as I noted, we partnered with the Department of Medicaid to release an RFP for a new vendor for the new Ohio Housing Locator. Our board approved a new vendor. As part of that RFP, one of the things that we really wanted was an entity that had the capacity and ability to assist us with maintaining those units as up to the listings as up to date as possible. So we ended up on a vendor that has a 50-hour-a-week call center called Social Serve. So if those of you are from Cleveland or from Summit County, you may be familiar with the old Cleveland Housing Locator. And I can't remember if the Akron one or Summit County, it's Summit County Locator or Akron Housing Locator, but both of those had that same vendor. So the individuals who staff that call center are able to answer questions of individuals who are seeking housing or individuals who are seeking housing on behalf of someone, so a caseworker or social worker. And then, of course, they can assist owners or management agents with listing their properties on the locator registry as well. So we did a soft launch of the new housing locator website in December of 2019. And then transitioned the Lead Safe registry into the new locator in February of 2020. And then just recently, last week or week before, the Ohio Lead Advisory Council, which was created by statute to advise the Ohio Department of Health on lead issues, created a work group specifically dedicated to kind of helping further market and make people aware of the registry, and of course increase the number of units that are in the registry, particularly those that are pre-78 units. We've done a pretty good job of getting a lot of, say for instance, projects that are financed with OHHN financing that have been built after 1978. A lot of those units are already in the locator, and we're adding to that as we go. But we want to keep improving this locator. And I should say we want to work collaboratively with entities that have their own rental or lead safe housing registries. So some of the municipalities that are joining us today for this panel. And it's really intended to augment or supplement the great work that those folks are doing, not necessarily take over that or so again, as I mentioned, the call center enables the listings to be as up to date as possible. So if someone is searching for lead safe housing or just a regular unit that hasn't been certified as such in the locator, these should be available because they're only listing properties that are actually available at the time. So next slide, please. So the lead safe certification process, of course, the Ohio Department of Health administers that certification process for the lead safe residential units that get put into the registry. So owner or agents will submit that documentation online. That documentation is identifying whether the specific units are lead safe or whether entire buildings are lead safe. And so the Ohio Department of Health staff is receiving notice from the locator and registry system, and it's accessing that to review that documentation certify it, approve it, and then get it posted by the vendor to the registry. Next slide. So there are really two types of registration. There's the pre-1978 rental property registration, and then of course the post-1977 property registration. So the rental property owner or manager has to provide the Ohio Department of Health with documentation that the property is lead-free. That means that they have to provide a lead inspection report completed by a licensed lead risk assessor or inspector. And then that rental registration doesn't expire since it's been certified as actually lead-free. If it's being documented that it's lead safe, the owner or agent is going to have to provide proof that the visual examination or clearance has been performed within the last month. And then that registration has to be renewed on an annual basis. And the registry system is set up such that it kind of expires automatically. And recently we've discussed with the Department of Health and the vendor adding something of a reminder system so that the owner management agent is getting notification that they're coming up on their expiration date within 90 or 60 days. Next slide, please. So as I noted, the second registration type is the post-1977 registration. That owner or manager has to provide the Ohio Department of Health with evidence that the property was built after January 1, 1978. So some examples of that information that would be provided to evidence that are certificates of occupancy, county auditor's cards, etc. So as I noted before, we've been working with the Department of Health to add a lot of our low-income housing tax credit projects that we're financing at OFA on the registry that were built after 1978. So there's that. And of course, because it was built after 1978, once you've demonstrated that, the rental registration doesn't expire. Next slide, please. Not being able to show you a demo today exactly, but I can give you just some basics on how to search. There's the website link URL, ohiohousinglocator.org. There's really two ways to search. One is to search on the Ohio Housing Locator main page. And then within that, you can go to advanced settings and select lead safe housing as part of your search. Next slide. And so that's really what you're looking at here is the how to search for the lead safe housing units on that main Ohio Housing Locator page. So it's nice, you can type in Columbus, you can type in a township or village, and it should list properties that are actually available in the system. Next slide, please. So, and as I noted, on that, on the main page, there are kind of three boxes, and the left box has lead safe, and so that's nice if you're really looking specifically for lead safe units. That helps filter all those out immediately. So by clicking on that green box, we'll take you to a subpage that only is going to provide you with lead safe units, those that have been certified as such. Next slide, please. A couple things I'll just add. So I encourage, obviously, if you're a tenant looking for lead safe housing, please utilize the Housing Locator and Lead Safe Registry. If you're an owner or manager who wants to list your property in the registry, by all means, please click on that blue box on the last page, and that gives you instructions on how to register your property. As I noted, we made a lot of progress in the last few months. As of the end of September, we had 228 properties and just over 8,400 units in the registry itself. And in the Ohio Housing Locator overall, which of course is more all-encompassing, it had 16,500 properties and over 67,000 units of affordable housing listed and available. And there's been about 412,000 searches year to date, so it's getting utilized and is a great resource for folks to access both affordable and accessible housing and housing that has been certified as lead safe. So I will end my comments there. Tim didn't have to tell me to speed up. So.
Thank you so much, Kellen. I appreciate your presentation, and we'll go ahead and move right along. Ayana, who I believe you all can't see due to some technical difficulties that we're having, because what's 2020 without some difficulties, technical or otherwise, but feel free to take it away, Ayana, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I got all gussied up this morning thinking that you guys would be able to see me. But here we are. But thank you for having me today. So briefly, I'm the Director of Building and Housing. And so I'm just going to present a little bit overall from the perspective of the Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition. A lot of shared information as well as specific information on the lead certificate implementation that we're rolling out. Next slide, please. So just as an overview, I'm sure that most of you guys know, of the lead poisoning issue that we have here in Cleveland. As you see here, this is just a map that displays from 2016, where our children with the highest elevated blood lead levels resided. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello.
Appears we might be having some technical difficulties on the back end.
Okay. The slide that Are you seeing still slide lead poisoning of Cleveland's children?
Yeah, we are still seeing that. We are trying to get that moved.
Okay.
Yeah, not really sure what the.
Oh, it advanced 2 slides. Oh, I don't know what happened. Thank you. With us, we have a Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition. There are over 400 members in that coalition. So that coalition ranges from residents, tenants, landlords, public, philanthropic. I mean, probably most any foundation here in the city of Cleveland is involved. City partnership, a variety of city of Cleveland departments, county departments, etc. So this has been a long time coming for the city of Cleveland. And starting last year in January is when the coalition was formed and founded, and really honored to move forward a piece of legislation in order to advance the objective of making the rental properties here in Cleveland lead safe. Next slide. For years and years, we have treated the lead issue here in Cleveland as being very reactive and not proactive. Reactive in the sense of once a child is lead poisoned, that's when someone, an entity, namely our Department of Health, would get involved and try to figure out what's going on while that child was poisoned and what were the issues with the structure. But keep in mind, we really hadn't looked at this as a public health crisis with a housing solution, because quite frankly it is. And here is where my Department of Building and Housing kind of steps in. Next slide. Is really looking at this as an issue with housing. How can we correct the housing? How can we be proactive? So we're focusing on prevention by proactively creating lead-safe homes. In August, next slide, of last year, we actually passed the lead poisoning prevention law. With the help of the Lead Safe Coalition, City Council, almost unanimously, we had one holdout there, passed the historic lead poisoning prevention law. And this law puts a lot of things in place that I will speak briefly about today. But the most important thing is setting up the lead safe certification. Next slide. Now, this lead safe certification, specifically all rental properties, it's estimated that we have about 100,000 rental units Case Western Reserve University actually conducted a survey this year to expand and really explore county auditor data, postal vacancy data, ownership data, et cetera, to narrow down and get a pretty like a firm grasp on how many rental units we have here and what type of owner. Surprisingly, as much as we do have a lot of state owners, we do have a lot of out-of-country owners, but the vast majority of owners were actually, unlike your local mom and pops, right? Individuals that own properties. So out of the 100,000 rental units that we have about this year 53,000 rental units registered. Because of the pandemic, we're a little bit behind where we normally are. But all of those people, beginning in March of 2021, so all rental properties that are pre-1978 are required to obtain a lead safe certification. So what exactly does that mean? That landlords are expected to use a private state certified professional, certified by ODH, to show that their property does not have any lead hazards present. Once you obtain this clearance examination or this lead risk assessment, that information will be provided back to my department, to Building and Housing, in order for a certificate to be issued. Next slide. So please keep in mind that our rental registration is $70 per unit. You pay that on an annual basis. The rental registration goes with the property owner. So if ownership changes for a unit or a property, then that new owner would have to re-register the property and pay a new fee. The lead safe certification does not. It is actually renewed on a 2-year basis, and there is no fee associated with the lead safe certificate. The timeline for the rollout. We decided to roll this out on a quarterly basis. So the first set of zip codes, each set, there's about 8 quarters between March 2021 and March 2023. There's about 12,500 units per section. So we wanted to make it even. It'll roll out between March 2021 and March 2023. We put a lot of effort into choosing the zip codes, and I have a chart, so I'll save that conversation. Now, can you also receive a lead-free exemption? Absolutely. Very similar to Toledo in the sense that there is an exemption, and as opposed to renewing your certificate every 2 years, you can renew it every 20 years. I fully expect that property owners, perhaps buildings that have a large number of units, maybe over 200 or maybe even over 20, et cetera, would exercise this 20-year exemption just because it's more feasible economically to get the 20-year certification once every 20 years as opposed to certifying the units every 2 years. Next slide. Do all of the units in a building have to be inspected? No, they do not. We are following exactly HUD guidelines in the sense of any buildings with more than 5 rental units will inspect a portion of those units congruent and according to federal guidelines. So we are not straying away from that. We are doing mass mailers. So not only the Lead Safe Coalition has its own marketing plan, also the Department of Building and Housing will be doing separate marketing. So we will send out, Department of Building and Housing will send out at least 3 notifications to the landlords to let them know before their expiration date for the Lead Safe certificate. And then the Lead Safe Coalition on its own is also doing a separate marketing campaign with bus ads and with billboards and radio ads and target mailers in the mail, postcards and brochures, et cetera. So we're kind of approaching this from 2 different ways. For the main fact, when you get something in the mail from the City of Cleveland, Department of Building and Housing, gets a different look than if it comes from the Lead Safe Coalition or an entity that is separate from the city. As people here know, sometimes things from the city go unopened and unanswered. And as a reminder, again, how will someone receive their Lead Safe certification? For a period of 2.5 years, the city itself, we were doing lead dust inspections randomly until this program came into place and ramped up. We discontinued that in December of last year in order to ramp up the lead safe certification and the efforts to have third-party inspectors do the work. Next slide. And so I've talked about it a little bit, but we have two other really partner organizations that come from the Lead Safe Coalition and have been contracted actually by the Lead Safe Coalition to do kind of like wraparound services. We have Environmental Health Watch, who will lead the Resource Center, and Cleveland Housing Network that will administer all incentives, loans, and grants. So the first step is to contact the Resource Center that is ran by Environmental Health Watch. We aim to forward and steer phone calls with questions and people that need help to the Resource Center, so they're able to be placed with the right information and with the right entity to assist. Step two, we're suggesting, prepare your property. If your property was built before 1978, not to go into a test blindly in the sense of try to do some environmental cleanings and some remediation before actually the property receives its first test. Step three is to remediate the lead hazards. Of course, if lead hazards are present, hire a certified lead safe worker or become an RRP certified contractor to complete the work. Step four, get lead clearance. Get a clearance examination or a risk assessment. We are accepting either test interchangeably. One, of course, is a little bit more detailed than the other, but we are allowing either test to be submitted to us. And once you receive that, submit it to the Department of Building and Housing for clearance. Next slide. I spoke about this briefly earlier. Here is just a quick little snapshot of how we broke up the city. So how we rolled out our plan, we did not start off with the hardest hit. Each little group you see here is about, as I mentioned, 12,500 rental units. And since we do have a Lead Safe Coalition that is working towards raising $99 million, so far we have raised about $22 million to assist with the lead certification plan, implementation, training, et cetera. We wanted the Lead Safe Coalition, meaning building and housing, to be able to quote unquote keep up with us, right? And target. So instead of starting with the hardest hit areas, they're mixed in there in the middle, essentially, part of our rollout, because we wanted the Lead Safe Coalition to have time to target the hardest hit areas for our system not to be inundated, and quite frankly, local workers, lead abatement contractors, et cetera, to be inundated with that work in the very beginning. We also kind of mixed it up here in Cleveland. We're split by a river. So we kind of mixed things up as far as a couple east side locations, a couple west side locations to keep things kind of balanced as we roll things out. Next slide. So as far as enforcement, our enforcement, meaning if you do not adhere to the Lead Safe certification law or the rental registration, which I haven't talked in detail about, but the enforcement are both for both of those are criminal penalties. We do not have any civil penalties. There's either a ticket or a violation notice, which either has a penalty of a minor misdemeanor or a misdemeanor in the first degree. As far as the conflict of interest, it's very important as well that in the legislation, it states specifics regarding not having the lead inspector be related to you, a familial interest, et cetera, so that there is some type of arm's length situation with whatever inspector is coming out to inspect the property to try to keep people honest. Another very important part of the legislation was the establishing of 3 different boards/commissions. The most important, at least for me, is for building and housing, is the Lead Safe Advisory Board. This board will be appointed by the mayor. 1 seat will be appointed by council. And this board will meet at the very least on a quarterly basis to review the implementations or any unintended consequences that this ordinance may be having. As this legislation was an open discussion with the public and council was debating on what was needed, it would, a lot of comments and fears came up about unintended consequences. Will tenants be displaced? Will the costs that are attributed to the landlords skyrocket and make rents go up? Is my department, quite frankly, doing what we need to do to implement this, et cetera? So this advisory board really will monitor and watch the progress of the legislation and see if it's working, see things that are not working, and if any changes need to be made. Another piece of this legislation was the specific calling out of a lead safe auditor. The legislation is a little bit vague. It says a lead safe auditor needs to be in place by my department. However, I felt it very important that this person or entity not necessarily be an employee of my department in order to really be honest with us and not have to feel that, maybe they have to manipulate data to show one thing or another. So we have contracted with Case Western Reserve University and the Urban Poverty Center, and Dr. Fisher will serve as our lead safe auditor. So really like a neutral third party that has access to, I don't know how many data points throughout the city and county, et cetera. And we aim to have that first auditor report available in January. So if anybody on the line is kind of curious about that, it will should be publicly available in January. Also, just quickly, the Lead Safe Housing Action Board will be formulated from a group of organizations that receive city funding for housing. And so the purpose of that board is really to have housing units available in the unfortunate case if tenants are displaced because of lead remediation that's happening at their current property, or they may just need to be displaced for a week because of work that's being done, or if they're permanently displaced. And the Screening and Testing Commission is just a commission that's working together to advocate on the federal, state, and local level for better screening and testing policies for children. Next slide. What I spoke about briefly, the Lead Safe Home Fund will be administering home loans and grants. It's also funding the Lead Safe Resource Center. And we have started a soft launch on many services already this fall. Next slide. Environmental Health Watch will have a lead resource center. It's set up in the Midtown location here in Cleveland. They have a great location. They also have like a workshop. It's just if you're ever in the area, I'm sure Kim Foreman of Environmental Health Watch would love to give you a tour. There's a call center located there that will assist with lead safe certification navigation, community outreach and organizing. She has a team of people that are community ambassadors that have been working for at least the past year, just knocking on doors. I mean, giving a different sense of the engagement outside of just the Department of Building and Housing. Also, she's been conducting workforce training. If you can go to the next slide. So very similar to Toledo, what was mentioned about the 100 training, that's essentially what we're trying to accomplish before the end of the year as well. We're doing renovation, repair, and painting courses that started earlier this month. They are free. We do require a refundable deposit, really mainly to make sure that people are interested and serious about taking the course, since there are only 8 students per class. There is a website listed here. There are a lot of resources. The Lead Safe Cleveland, part of our marketing campaign, the very first one was to really stand up a website. And here is the website that's listed on the screen that you can go to and look at a ton of things that we have available. There are also landlord and property manager, other workshops that she's working on. All properties have to be registered with the city of Cleveland in order to participate in the RRP training courses. And she's also doing lead inspector training as well, in addition to RRP training. Next slide. So as Cleveland Housing Network Housing Partners, they are administering all of the home loans, grants, and incentives to help property owners achieve the lead safe certification. The loans and grants and incentives will be available to property owners beginning this December. Next slide. And as mentioned, all of the incentives will be available evenly across the rollout groupings. However, we will target and have a target pool of incentives for the people in the hotspot zip code that was almost my first slide, in the areas where children test have the highest EBL rates. Next slide. Last but not least, just a reminder about the website. Please go and just check out where we're headed with our marketing and see what good information is out there. And that's it, as I'm being told to wrap up right on time. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Ayana. I know that you're getting ready to lead another meeting, so if you could stick around, fantastic. But thank you so much. We really did not receive very many questions. I will still go ahead and ask a couple though, and then we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up and hop off because I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. So one of the questions that we got came in during Carla's presentation, but I think that it can be answered by anyone who's still able to join us. We know that many vulnerable individuals are living in a situation of last resort. They really don't have any other options of where to live. How can we work to emphasize that this is a public safety issue? And wondering if there's a way to work in advocacy along with fire and police unions. So Carla, I'll let you start to answer that. And if anybody else wants to take a stab at that, it would certainly be appreciated.
As far as it being promoted as a public health issue, I think that, that is the key, is kind of creating a campaign around it so that people do understand what's coming and why the need is there. And that can involve public service announcements, radio spots with the police chief and the fire chief, things of that nature. We are having a housing task force created shortly, and that should have a lot of community stakeholders, including owner investors in it. So hopefully working with them to create some sort of public awareness campaign about the upcoming registry and why it's necessary would definitely, I think, benefit everybody, including homeowners who don't realize that, the people living next to them are maybe not bad tenants, but vulnerable tenants who need help and looking after. So.
I just want to interject one quick thing. I think Carla's absolutely right that, this has to be a public health and safety issue from the get-go. And if I could give anyone advice on how to do this right from the start, it would be to start with that. Start with that kind of advocacy and really explain why that you want to do these things, that it's not, you're not trying to make anybody's life difficult. You're not trying to charge a bunch of excess fees for no reason, that there is a problem and why the problem exists and, what needs to be done about that, and use data wherever you can. Work with your local health departments to show those elevated blood lead levels in children, whatever you can do to use that data to really show that the problem is there and what needs to be done from the get-go.
Very good. No, I think that's incredibly important. And so thank you to the both of you for sharing that insight. Like I said, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I know we are starting to go a bit over. So, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I just want to remind all of the sanitarians on the line who have not entered their RS number or their name into the chat box. If they want the CE credits, please do that now. And don't forget that we also have a survey at the end. And if people want to fill that out and let us know what they thought of the presentation, we would certainly appreciate that. Next slide. And then just one more time, I'd like to offer my thanks to our wonderful sponsors. Thank you so much for making today's presentation possible. Thank you so much, for making the entire webinar series throughout the week possible. We could not have done this without you all. And again, a special shout out and a thanks to OHHN. It was a wonderful presentation from everybody involved. I hope everybody learned a lot. I know I certainly did. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time this morning, and have a good rest of your day. Take care.